So today I'm talking about neocolonialism in Africa. So neocolonialism is basically the control of less developed or developing countries by more developed countries. It could be their previous colonizers or their previous colonial masters. For example, the colonial masters were Portuguese, France, Spain, British, name them, all of those, Germany, all of those colonial powers. So, but also right now, these other developing countries or second world countries such as Japan, China, these are also developing economies, but they are kind of like already developed. Like for example, China and Japan, they are almost at the top, so they're still controlling. It doesn't have to be the previous colonial masters, but it has to be a powerful country. I hope you understand that. So neocolonialism in Africa is basically that type of control. So what causes neocolonialism in Africa? First reason is debt. African countries tend to take debt from the developed countries, for example, through World Bank, IMF, maybe for example, Kenya gets some debts from China. Let's say they get debts so that we can have like better roads, we can have better railways, we can have, just name small developments, but maybe the contract says that like, okay, now we're going to develop the roads for you, or we're going to build the roads for you, but then in return, let's say we get the coffee from you guys for like 50 years, it could be something of that sort. So the debt makes these colonial or these powers or these developed countries to be able to control these developing countries. And it's not necessarily only Kenya. For example, even Tanzania, they get some debts from let's say the US, they get debts from UK and all of this, and that's how they're able to maintain the control. Because when you have somebody's debt, you tend to like just stay cautious. It's like, you cannot say no whenever they want you to do something, because it's just human nature. Like somebody gives you some money, they come to you in times of need and they like help you out, so you're gonna stay loyal to them. The other factor is political control. Some of the presidents in African countries, they become president through the support of like the developed countries. But let's say they finance their campaigns, they finance their political bid, but then when they become presidents, in return, so that they can return that favor of like that support, they have to become a puppet to these countries, So like let's say for example, France supports Ghana in a particular project, Ghanaian presidents, maybe France supports Ghanaian presidents, they give them campaign money, they support them, they do campaign for them, they post and say that like this is the best person that we could ever get. And then after they become presidents, maybe they want to extract some minerals, do some mining in these countries. This person will not say no, because the reason they have become president or the reason they are in power is because they got the support from this powerful country. The other factor is cultural control. For example, right now, if you come to Kenya, like for example Nairobi, you will find out that most people do not speak in their tribal languages. People don't speak in their local languages. Like you can hear some little bit of Swahili, but you will hear a lot of English, because that is, first of all, one of the things that we have lost because of neocolonialism is our culture. Like we don't like our languages anymore, because right now everybody insists on like you should learn English. Okay, if you don't learn English, then you're being called kienyeji, you're not assimilating, you're not becoming better, because success in Africa right now is being measured by how much have you assimilated to the Western cultures, how well can you speak in English, okay, how well do you dress according to the Western standards. Beauty standards in Africa have changed. Like traditionally, beauty standard in Africa used to be like a lady being curvy so that they can be, in Africa people used to have like many children, as many as 10, 20, and that. So the beauty standards, people used to look at like the woman's curves, she had to be big, and the bigger her curves are, or the bigger her hips were, that is how the men would know, this one will be able to produce lots of children for me, they will have some good childbearing characteristics. But right now we have also taken the Western like beauty standards, like to be slender, to be so slim. People are starving themselves so that they can be this slim, which is actually a Western beauty standard. Africans were not supposed to be slender. We did have the slim people, but most of the African women were actually huge. Okay, that's one of the characteristics of black people. Black women mostly are usually curvaceous, but because of their influence, we have been able to assimilate, and now that we have these beauty standards. So the other factor is like traditions. We were told that our traditions are like witchcraft. Let's say during dowries, the things that people normally do during the African traditional dowry sessions, like let's say they go to the gate wearing some type of clothes, and then they're singing, they have slaughtered some goats, some sheep, some cows during these ceremonies. to the people who are like civilized, for them it's like, oh, this is some type of like witchcraft or some type of like some primitive behavior, and people have actually abandoned this. People are actually just assimilating to the Western way of like doing weddings, with no specific reason, just so that they're not seen as primitive, or they're not seen as local or kienyeji, as we call it. So that is the influence of culture. We have lost our traditions. We don't pride ourselves in our traditional way of dressing, like the way we used to dress with like the Maasai people, how they dress in the shukas. When we see them dressing like that, it's like, oh, that's primitive, why are they dressing like that? Why can't they just wear like normal clothes, and that's how we have lost our own traditional ways of like dressing, language, culture, traditions, So by assimilating and by adopting the Western culture, we are able to dislike our own culture, and that's another way that the Western cultures or the developed countries are able to control Africa. You understand? So the other factor is economic dependence. Africa have never been fully independent. Like most of the African countries still depend on European countries for one way or another, mostly foreign aid. Let's say, for example, HIV medicines. In Kenya, we do get HIV medicines, I think, from German or even the US. So we do depend on them so that they can be able to supply these medicines to us. If we cannot be able to do our own research, we cannot be able to go and study, like maybe do a benchmarking and learn how they are making these medicines, so that we can be able to make these medicines ourselves. If we cannot do that, if we cannot invest in like having that basic knowledge so that we can be able to produce our own medicine and our own HIV patients are able to be treated from within. What if now these countries say that like we are not going to be supplying these HIV medicines anymore? What do you mean? We do have a lot of people in Africa with like different types of diseases, and they do depend from these medicines. So you can see it's just like this ignorance which comes as a result of being dependent on another person. When you depend on another person, sometimes it's just so difficult for you, even as a person, to be able to think, what can I do so that I can be able to solve this? But I feel like if Africa is not depending on other developed countries, for example, for the support, and I will focus on medicine because without this medicine, these people cannot exist. If Africa is not depending on these countries for this, what would they do? They would actually maybe do some research, like how can we be able to, what are the ingredients of this medicine? Maybe they would request these countries, let us come to your country and benchmark how you guys are doing this, so that, and which materials you're using, which are the ingredients, so that also we can be able to make this type of medicine. So the economic dependence, we depend on foreign aid, like we keep begging, like we keep, oh, can you guys come and support our country? And whenever we are getting this, it's like handouts. Whenever you're getting these handouts, you're not able to think, what can we be able to do as a continent? As African nations cannot be able to ask themselves, what can we be able to do for ourselves? What can we be able to do so that we stop depending on these other places? So you see, economic dependence is one of the very major factors. The other thing that have led to neocolonialism is personal interest of leaders. We do have leaders that are so ignorant. Like whenever somebody is aspiring to become a leader in these countries, like whenever somebody is aspiring to become a president of South Africa, somebody is aspiring to become a president of Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, Congo, they do have a lot of aspirations, and they do talk about like Pan-Africanism, like how they are going to unite Africa, how they are going to develop Africa. But then after they become presidents and they are approached by these developed countries, they tend to humble themselves. They tend to like lose the goal. They lose the goal that was making them aspire to become leaders and to bring the change. So you see, let's say like they are called by some developed countries and they're like, we can do this and that, and now they just count how they will be able to benefit as individuals. So we do have leaders who have been selling out Africa continuously, which is one of the factors that we are still talking about in neocolonialism to date. So we have already discussed economic independence, cultural assimilation to the Western way of life. We have talked about debts. We have talked about like just ignorance, like just the ignorance, and like you don't want to know how you can be able to depend on yourself. You don't want to know how you can be able to like stand by ourselves. That is one of the factors that have made neocolonialism to be present up to date. So the other factor is like we don't have the corporate, or we don't have the ability to be able to process our own raw materials. So like, for example, we do grow cocoa and coffee. We are not able to process this raw material. We normally export a lot of cocoa to France, and then they do have the machinery, they do have the ability to be able to process it, and then they export it back to African countries, and also now we import at a higher price, which means they take our raw product, they process it, and then they sell it to us. They take our raw product at a lower price, and then they sell it to us at a higher price. What type of ridiculousness is that? Like, how maybe we can be able to invest, or maybe even have 2 companies within Africa, like of 3, we can have one in Nigeria, we can have one in South Africa, we can have one in Central Africa, and that's we are not forced to like export our raw materials to Western countries so that they can be able to export them back to us at a higher price. So let's say we can be able to grow coffee in Kenya and be able to process it even in Tanzania. Why not? Because that is just growing our own countries. The other day somebody was saying that like traveling within Africa, let's say from Kenya to like let's say Congo, it's more expensive than traveling from Kenya to Saudi Arabia or to like Dubai. Why? Because it's like we are not, or the leaders that we do have, they're not investing in like making Africa like a global village, or you know, a global village. We make it a global village to other places, like you know, everybody else, the Western countries can be able to travel to Africa like they wish, you know, but you know, us as Africans, we're not able to do that. So if they can be able to make Africa a global village to other people, why can't they be able to make Africa a continent village to ourselves? Why is it like me traveling from Kenya to Nigeria, it seems like I'm traveling from Kenya to Dubai? You understand? So there's a lot of things that we need to look at when we're talking about neocolonization, and I want to know you guys' opinion. What do you think? Like, what do you think? What is your opinion about neocolonialism? Do you think that Africa will ever get there? Do you think that Africa will ever become independent? We were celebrating independence in Kenya like on 12th of December. It's actually 2 days ago, and I've just been wondering, are we really independent? Are we really worthy to even celebrate that day at this point? Like, it's just been already like 2 generations. It's already been like almost 65 years or 67, and we're still here. Why are we still depending on other countries? So that is my take for today. So you guys let me know what you think, and thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye bye.